Hi, this is Mr. DeBerry with Elgin High School Automotive. We're going to take a look today at how to perform a ISO bubble flare and an SAE double flare. These are two of the most common types of brake line fittings that you're going to see in the automotive industry. So brake lines commonly fail. They rot out, they rust, and then they snap, break in half, and then they leak. So this is an easy kind of a do-it-yourself way to make your own custom brake line for a legitimate repair. Okay, so getting started, we'll take a look at some of the tools that are involved in performing a brake line flare. And the line we're going to be using today is going to be 3/16 brake line. So you can pick it up at any automotive parts store. Usually you can pick it up in a roll. I got this 25 feet for like, a little over $50. So 25 feet, you could do a fair amount of your vehicle, if not the whole entire car. So so that's the line that we're going to be using today. So we'll just take a small chunk of this. And then right here, this is a standard double flaring kit that you would commonly pick up at an auto parts store, or you could purchase online. Now, most auto parts stores will actually rent you a kit very similar to this, if not the same one. This one's made by OTC. I picked it up on Tooltopia. So it works extremely well for what we're using it for. So this is the double flaring kit. Next we have a couple of line cutters. So this is what we use to service and cut the line. Now it's important that you get tubing cutters like this, mainly because you want to have a clean 90-degree cut on that brake line. So I would not recommend using like side cutters, because you'll pinch the line and then that's pretty much useless. Or if you use like an angle grinder, you might cut through the line at any angle other than 90 degrees, and that can give you problems with the flaring process. So, and these are pretty cheap, and they usually come with the kits. Next, I got some junky old needle nose. I like to use these for deburring, so I'll demo that when we get there. And then these are tubing benders. So these work really well for bending different types of tubing sizes. We've got a couple of different sizes that we can run on this, but we're just going to concentrate on the 3/16. But you can run 3/16 all the way up to like 3/8 line, and then you can make nice tight 180-degree bends using this tool. One of my more favorite tubing benders are these pliers, and I picked these ones up at Tooltopia. These are fantastic. If you need to make a really tight 90-degree bend in your brake line, these work great. So I'll demo that when we get to that as well. All right, so we'll get started. All right, so now we're going to take a look at cutting this line. We're going to get started here. But first, we're going to take a look at this is a damaged line cutter, tubing cutter. And what you can see is on the actual wheel right here, you can see there's some teeth missing on the inside there. And this is a common problem when you over tighten. When you use these tubing cutters and you just tighten them like crazy and then try to rotate them once and break the line, you're going to tend to chip away at these teeth. Or if you just play with them and you spin them together and crank on them, that'll damage the actual cutting wheel on there. So just take care. I mean, they're not very expensive, but on the same token, they should last a long time if you treat them right. So that being said, we're not going to use this one. This is a pretty decent one, so we'll give this one a shot. So you've got two rollers on the inside of this, and the majority of tubing cutters are all designed the same. So you get two rollers just like this. The line has to sit in between the two rollers, and then you have the cutting wheel that's going to come directly down into the line. So to set it up, put your line in between the two rollers, and then twist the handle until it comes in contact with that line. And then just light pressure twisting, and then rotate. Every 360 degrees, just give it a little bit more pressure. Sometimes you can go a couple more times. I like to just keep rotating until it gets nice and easy, and then I just give it about 1/8 of a turn. So just enough to snug it up, and just like that, the line falls off. So nice and easy. Now once we cut our line off, what you're going to see is on this end right here, pretty easy to see, you got a nice crisp cut. Okay, there's no problems with this whatsoever. This is a nice clean end fitting. This is the end of the line when I purchased it. Okay, now the end of the line where we cut it looks like this. So when taking a look at this side of the line, you can see that the material right here is kind of folded over and it is shortened up the hole on the inside. Now because of that, we have to deburr it, because when we go to actually press this line and make our end fitting, this can actually pinch onto our die that goes inside of it, and then it could break the stem off. So I've had that happen a couple of times. So now to deburr it, it's pretty simple. Some tools, such as this tubing cutter, actually has a deburring blade on it. So you can pull this blade out just like that, go up to your line, insert, and then just twist around. And this works out pretty well for the most part. I mean, that'll do a pretty good job. Not really giving it an honest try, but what I like to do is just take some old junky needle nose pliers, and these ones you can see one of the ends is kind of busted off here. So I use this end right here, and this works just really well for deburring the inside of this line. I just shove it in, give it a couple of twists all the way around. And once you're done, then you got a nice clean opening that should be reminiscent to the other side. So it's a good way to do it. Now obviously when you're done, you want to try to clean it up as best you can. You can just kind of blow through it a little bit. Just wouldn't recommend putting your lips on it, so just hold your two fingers like that and just blow against your fingers and shoot out whatever's in there if you can. We're going to go ahead and get it set up with this flaring tool, and it's best that if we take the flaring bar and if we clamp this in a vise. Now if you're working on a vehicle, you could just clamp this straight to the line that's attached to the vehicle and it's not a big deal. So I've done that countless times. It works, you know, you'll have success. It's not a big deal. It's kind of frustrating to fumble with, but you know, ultimately you can make do. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to set this up on a vise and get everything set to do our first flare, which is going to be the SAE double flare. Alright, so now that we got the flaring bar set in the vise, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put our 3/16 into the actual flaring bar. Now there are markings on the flaring bar that tell you where the which size or which opening to use. So hang with me real quick. I'm gonna shoot this on there. So right there you can see we got our 3/16, which is the smallest one, and this is the most common for brake line. And if you got a metric brake line, it's like 4.75 millimeters. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna use that 3/16. Okay. All right. So what you want to do is you want to stick the brake line up inside of there. But you want this 3/16 brake line, you want it to set up to a certain height. So right here is where we're going to concentrate. Let's see if I can get a better view. I apologize, I'm a little sick. Now when you're setting this up, you're going to have these dies. Kind of difficult to see. I've got two of them. They're both 3/16, but they're just like different designs. So I wanted to show them both to you. Depending on which one you use, you have to use a different segment for measuring the height. So the best way to do it is to just go ahead and place the die on the bar, and then you level out the top of the brake line with the first shelf of the die. So that's too low, that would be too high. So right about here would be just right. Now if we were using the other die, this one actually has a line. You can barely see it, but there's a line that's stitched into it, and you want to line the brake line up with that stitched line that's in that die. Okay, but we're not going to use this one. So going back to this guy, this die, we're going to go ahead, set our line up best we can. Once we got that, Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to tighten down on the wing nuts. Back out a little bit. So this will go ahead and make it nice and tight. So that way the brake line is not going to slip through when we press the die into the line. Now typically when you do this, I like to use the bar of the press here and just kind of wedge it in between the wing nuts just to pull them in as far as I can. Because if I got this line nice and tight, it's not going to go anywhere. Alright, so the next step is we're going to go ahead and we're going to press this in. Alright, so now we're going to take our yoke assembly, which is this guy right here. You can kind of see it. And we're going to take our die, that guy right there. And you see the die's got a stem right in the middle. That stem has to go inside the brake line, just like that. And then we take our yoke, line up the yoke so it's right in the middle of that die. Now the yoke can turn and twist like this. That's not a big deal, as long as it relatively stays centered on that brake line. Let's pull back out this way so you can kind of get a good view. Alright, so we're just going to go ahead and we're going to tighten this in. You're going to tighten this down until the die gets all the way down to the bar. So right there, if we take a close look, we can see our die is all the way bottomed out. So at this point we're going to go ahead and we're going to release. So turn counterclockwise. And now we can take our die out. So at this point, this is what I'd refer to as like a poor man's bubble flare. And we'll go back over it and we'll do this again. Now there's special tools out there that make ISO bubble flares, but I've done this multiple times and it works. So it's a nice easy trick. Now to make the double flare, the SAE double, we leave everything alone on the bar, and then we're going to go ahead, we're going to bring this back in, and then we're just going to line this up without the die. We have a 45-degree flare on this portion right here, so you might be able to read that right there. So that's going to give us a nice 45-degree angle on the inside, and that's perfect for our double flares. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to tighten this guy up. Now when I tighten this, I'm only going to bring it down until it's snug, until I just start to get a fair amount of resistance. So right about there. Now I'm just going to back it up. And remove from the bar. Okay, so right there, at this point, you can see that we got a nice flare going right on the inside. So next thing we're going to do is we're just going to loosen everything up and remove it. A little bit tight. Okay, so right there, you can see we got pretty good looking flare. Not going to have any issues with that. So that'll seal up nice and tight. Now one thing that I did not cover is if you're going to perform this flare, and let's say that this brake line was on the vehicle, you're going to have to run the flare nut onto this brake line before you do this flare. Otherwise you're going to have to cut the flare off and do it again, which I've been guilty of multiple times, forgetting to put that flare nut on there before I do this. So just keep that in mind, and I'll show you some of the different flare nuts that we have. This is a different brake line size. This is a 1/4 inch, but the only reason I did that is because I don't have any 3/16 line nuts. But you can see right here that this is a 3/16 line nut. Now this is for standard fitting, and the quick and easiest way you could tell is because if you have a metric ISO bubble flare, usually you have this, you'll have a little shoulder right here before the threads actually start, and generally they're a little bit deeper. So this is typical for a metric fitting, and then this is typical for a standard fitting. So easy and simple. But auto parts stores have assortments of these, so you can get whatever you need to complete your job. And in some cases, I know Ford is pretty particular about this. They'll actually use a standard on one side and then a metric on the other side of the line. So keep in mind, some manufacturers use these two totally different flare nuts on the exact same brake line. So it's always recommended that if you're replacing an entire line, make sure that you restore and hold on to the original line nuts and try to reuse them as best you can. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and I'll actually slip this one on, and we'll make a ISO bubble flare on the other side here. So I'll show you how to do a real cheap version of that. Okay, so same deal as before. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to stick our brake line up in the 3/16 spot. I'll do this one a little bit quicker. And I did in fact put the line nut on for this side. So this will go up against this side. And take our die. Set it up to the shelf. And then lock it down. Okay, so again, this is for ISO double flare, or bubble flare, I'm sorry. Take our press, and all we're going to do is we're just going to run this die down. And once this die is run down, we're done. So right there, it stops. The die is pressed up against the bar. So now we're going to loosen up. Pull our die out. And we're going to take a look at our fitting. So right there we've got a pretty good bubble flare. Okay, and again, you know, this is kind of like the cheap way of doing it, but it's successful. So that's an ISO bubble, easy and simple. This is an SAE double. Okay, and this is what the ISO bubble looks like with the flare nut pushed up against it. Okay, so not too terrible, pretty easy job. Now the next thing I'm going to cover is bending the line. So one way you could do it is you could take the line, and I like these again because they can make really nice tight radiuses for 90-degree bends. So just take the tool, set it in, you can push in either direction, and then just rotate it around if you got to bend it in the opposite direction. And then you just push the tubing over. Give it a release. Pull it out, and that's a real nice tight bend with no kinks. I've bent a lot of brake lines by hand, and you could have a lot of success doing that, but it does take a little bit of time, a little bit of practice, a little bit of frustration, because sometimes when you try to make these tight bends by hand, they tend to kink in the middle, and then everything you just did is just scrapped. So I highly recommend those tools. So I'll try to post a link so you can get a hold of them if you need them. But yeah, so that's how we perform our flares. And make sure that your flare is all the way up against your flare nut is all the way up against your flare before you bend the line, because otherwise you're gonna be doing this again. Make sense? Alright, so now we'll take a look at this this tubing bender right here. So you can pick this up at an auto parts store as well. This one does a great job as well, and it's got 3 different grooves set up on the inside, so you just pick whichever one is correct for the right size. So in this case, our 1/4 inch line will fit pretty good, and this 1/4 inch to 3/16 this first side. We're to set this around. Now once we lay it down, what you'll notice is it sits at 0, so this is perfectly straight, ideally. And then you're going to pull the handles together, and depending on how much of an angle you want, that's where you stop. So in this case, we'll give it a pull, and we'll go to about 90. Alright, and you just go ahead and remove the tool, and there you go. So you got a perfect 90-degree bend, so nice clean radius, so no issues with that. Okay, again, make sure your flare nut is on the correct side before you do the bend, so that way you don't have any issues and you don't have to cut it and redo it. So that's how to perform double and bubble flaring, SAE and ISO. Alright, so one other thing I wanted to show you guys is if you wanted to flare like stainless steel line, like this line right here, you could use the kit that I just showed you. It may be difficult and it tends to break the stems because stainless steel is pretty tough in comparison to most other brake line. So what I recommend is a hydraulic flaring tool. Downside is the hydraulic flaring tool is way more expensive. So this is what that tool looks like. This does an excellent job. It's pretty much a guaranteed perfect flare every time, as long as you set everything up appropriately. I'm not going to get too crazy on the steps and procedures on this, so I'm just going to kind of quickly do a rundown and show you how it all works. So what we're going to be using is the 3/16 die. So that's this guy right up here, and then we have to use the this is the clamp. This is our die for the 3/16, and then we're going to use this 45-degree cone, okay, to perform this action. So we're going to take these main parts, and then the hydraulic flaring tool, and we'll get started. So first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that that your line nut, and if you use stainless steel lines, a wise idea, use stainless steel fittings. Beautiful part about stainless steel lines is for the most part they're going to come apart nice and easy for years and years. So if you got like a classic vehicle that you're working on, this is recommended. As far as like a daily driver that's got like 180,000 miles on it or something, I wouldn't really go this route unless it's like, you know, you're restoring it or whatever. So we take the 2 clamps, we set them up, and now what you want to do is you want to make sure that the line, the end of the line, is even or flush with the end of these 2 fittings. So when all said and done, it should look just like that. Okay. Now the tricky part is you have to get this to sit inside of the actual hydraulic press. So we got this wing nut right here, loosen it up, and then we take this assembly and we set it into place. So it's a little difficult to see, but I'm going to go ahead and try to set this up the best I can. Put a little bit of tension on it. Right there. And tighten it down. So right there I got the die set in place. It's all snugged up. I'm sorry, I got the clamp set in place. Everything's all snugged up. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to insert my die. So you got a little end right there. Fits directly on the inside. And then you want to line up the stem of the die directly with the opening on the inside of that brake line. And then we just rotate the handle, which is going to thread it in. Alright, so once we get that set up, we have a valve right here. Make sure that we're closed. Just 2 fingers. And then you got a pump right here. And so we're just going to pump. And this is going to press the die right into the line. Pump it till it stops. Turn the valve counterclockwise to release. Lock it. And then just back it out. So that right there is our first step. Hopefully you can get a kind of a decent view of it. So in the second step, is we're going to go ahead and take this 45-degree cone, and we're going to run that guy right up next to it, or right up against it. Again, I'm just trying to align the cone, snug up the valve right down here, and then we're just going to give it a couple of pumps. Right there, we're done. Loosen up, tighten down, and then back out. Okay, once it's all said and done, loosen up the wing nut, take the blocks out, and right there you've got your perfect 45-degree flare, and the line nut goes directly up against it, no problems. So, nice, easy, simple brake line. Okay. So again, that's how to use the hydraulic flaring tool. So this ranges in price. I think it's anywhere between $200 and $400. So like I said, it's a pretty intense investment. So if you're doing a lot of brake lines, especially if you're doing like custom brake lines with stainless steel, this is totally worth the money. However, this is really awkward to deal with underneath the vehicle. So if you're dealing with the line that's on the vehicle, you can use this, but it's really tough. Now, the added benefit to this tool is not only can you do brake lines, but you can also do push connect, like transmission and fuel lines. You also have a metric set. So if you want to perform ISO bubble flares, you have a real nice metric set, so you could do it right. Okay, so I'd recommend that. Here's your GM fuel line forming, and then all of these other lines and fittings, all the way up to 3/8 of an inch. Okay. All right. So that's it on double and bubble flaring. So thanks for watching.